Hey everybody, Plushie here, and today we're going to talk about the 10th anniversary servant, U-Olga Marie. Now, I've been pretty busy, again, as usual, especially considering I had to move during the Annie week. This has taken a bit longer than I would like it to be, but also this character is just very complicated. She essentially is a 2-in-1 character, and I would say the most complicated 2-in-1 character we've ever had, even when compared to characters such as Alco or Melusine or whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to break down. I do think this is a very exciting episode because looking at my friends list, a lot of people did use the free Annie courts to pull for high MP levels of Olga, so this is going to be very applicable to a big part of the player base, I'd imagine. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on the long-awaited director Olga Marie. So before we even get into her base stats, Olga Marie is of the Unbeast class. So just like other beast servants, she has a unique class interaction chart, and is actually quite easy to understand. Basically, she is a ruler against every class in the game, except when she's up against foreigners. So as you can see here, she's strong against Moon Cancers, weak against Avengers, and she resists the attacks of the standard 6 classes, and she also interacts the same against Berserkers, all identical to ruler. But when she's against foreigners, she deals and takes double damage, which is how foreigners interact with other foreigners. So yeah, it's actually a lot more simple than it might seem at the beginning. And it's an okay class, I would say. Ruler is in general a pretty good class, especially for boss fights, because of how tanky they are. However, I do have to remind you, she's going to be doing neutral damage most of the time, and because she's beast, she only has a hidden 1.0 times multiplier as opposed to other rulers who has 1.1 times multiplier. So as you'll see later in a bit, her MP damage isn't the prettiest, but she has a lot to make up for it, so no worries about that. Taking a look at her base stats, unfortunately, Olga Marie has pretty low attack stat. Her stat spread is definitely on the tankier side, which makes sense considering she's usually acting as a ruler, but considering she's also usually doing neutral damage, this is not the best for her farming damage. She has an AoE Buster MP with a BBAAQ deck, and a base gain of 0.43% per hit on 4-hit arch cards, 5-hit quick cards, and 5-hit extra attack. This is pretty good, the deck is standard for a Buster DPS, and the gains are actually, again, pretty serviceable. Her attributes, alignments, and traits all differ depending on her Ascension stage. So for attributes, she is Star in her 1st and 2nd Ascension, and she's Man in her 3rd Ascension. So against certain bosses, this will matter, but usually it's not that big a deal. Her alignments is Lawful Evil in 1st and 2nd Ascension, and Lawful Good in 3rd Ascension, which is a little bit more relevant because there is a 20% bomb boost CE that only works on Lawful Good, meaning that she can only take advantage of it if she's in her 3rd Ascension. As for basic traits, she is Divine, Nullifies Enuma Elish, Humanoid, and Servant in all of her Ascensions, but in her 1st and 2nd Ascension, she is Giant, Super Large, and Space Flightable, which none of them are super relevant in my opinion. And in 3rd Ascension, she is Defender, Hominidae, and Living Human. Living Human here, again, being a highlight because yet another 20% bomb boost CE applies to this Ascension. So she's gonna have a lot more bomb boost CEs that work with her in her 3rd Ascension. But again, you can't just always keep her in 3rd Ascension, considering her entire skill set is different depending on her Ascension as well. Because Olga Marie has 2 different skill sets essentially, depending on whether she's in 1st and 2nd Ascension or if she's in 3rd Ascension, I'm going to introduce her skill set as if I'm reviewing 2 servants. So I'm going to go through her skill 1, 2, 3 in the 1st and 2nd Ascension form first, and then move on to covering her skill 1, 2, 3 in her 3rd Ascension form, so that you can more easily make sense of how these skills are supposed to work with each other. But of course, I will still have the other form's skill info on screen, just sort of darked out. As you can see here, this is the format that we will be introducing her skills in. So I apologize for the complexity, but this is just how stacked of a servant she is in terms of sheer amount of effects in her skills. So first, we're going to cover her first and second Ascension form, which is going to be a more selfish, single core focused form. So when reading through her skills, you can try to keep that in mind so it makes a little bit more sense. So her first skill reduces all of her skills cooldown by 2, gives her a 50 star bomb, MP seals all enemies for 1 turn, and reduces all enemies' healing by 50% for 3 turns. The skill also gives her a 30% MP damage up for 3 turns, as well as gives her a full hand. So this works exactly the same as CL's skill 3, where she would get access to all of her cards, and then starting on the next turn, the card shuffle cycle will, reset. So this is to prevent her from getting all the cards this turn so that she runs out of cards for the following 2 turns. Like, that would not happen. The whole cycle will reset, so you would get just random cards on the following turn after this effect procs. And all of this is on a 7-turn cooldown. So the key effects of this skill is the cooldown reduction, the 50 star bomb, the MP damage up is quite nice, but not that key, I guess, and of course, the full hand shuffle. This means Olga Marie's single core looping comp can actually include her face card damage, considering she can guarantee getting all her cards, kind of like CL once again. The MP seal and the heal down are nice bonus effects, but they're not that relevant. And considering this skill reduces its own cooldown by 2, making it in reality a 5-turn cooldown skill, with the help of Append 5, she can recast this with just 1 Koyan Sky of Light, which we'll get into later when talking about her farming comps. She is extremely flexible in terms of that as well. Her looping damage is going to be extremely high compared to other Buster Loopers because she has access to all of her cards. So against one big target, you can do MP Buster extra, and both Busters are guaranteed to crit. Or against 2 big targets, you can even do Buster MP Buster. So you do, 2 extra Buster crits worth of damage against each target. Olga's second skill in her first form is a self 300 MP battery, as well as a self-overcharge boost by 2 stages for 1 time 3 turns, and finally a party HP drain demerit that actually goes down from 2000 to 1000 as you level it up. And all of this is on a 7-turn cooldown. Yet another insane skill. This skill, with the combination of her first skill, is essentially a 300 MP battery on a 5-turn cooldown. Remember that you can loop with Arcawade and Double Koyan Light without any specific Mystic Code with the help of Pen 5? Well, this is that but on steroids, because this is naturally a 5-turn cooldown skill as opposed to Arcawade's 7-turn cooldown skill. The Overcharge helps with her MP's super effective damage, because that's what it scales. We'll see later when talking about her MP. And the HP drain really doesn't matter that much, and it might even be a bonus if you're using her with Tonalico, because her charisma actually becomes higher the lower HP the target has. So this makes her, again, one of the most flexible, if not the most flexible Buster Looper in the entire game. And this is the first part about her kit that is pay to win, unfortunately. Because if you only have her at MP 1, the MP battery is a 100 MP battery. But if you have her at MP 2 to 4, it's a 200 MP battery. So it's 1 extra stage of overcharge. And if you have her at MP 5, it will fully charge to 300. So at MP 5, this skill is almost like a self 100 MP battery and then overcharge plus 4. So you are at max OC at MP 5. But at MP 1, this is just a overcharge plus 2 and a 100 MP battery, which will affect her damage against certain traded enemies, which I guess is kind of on brand because we've seen characters like Arcawade as well as Tonalico directly scaled their super effective with MP level. Olga just scales it indirectly with MP level. And finally, Olga's third skill in her first form can only be activated if you have 100 MP gauge or more. And when using it, it will drain 300%, or basically all of her MP gauge, regardless of how much she has. The skill gives the entire party 30% buster up for 3 turns, 100% extra attack effectiveness up for 3 turns, 30% crit up for 3 turns, and 50% MP gain up for 3 turns. All of these are, again, party-wide. The skill also gives herself 20% additional buster up for 3 turns, the party Info Pierce for 3 turns, and finally, it gives her a 1-turn power mod against the standard 7 classes for 50% for a single turn when activating the skill. All of this is on a 7-turn cooldown once again. So if you just look at the positive effects of this skill, it's kind of insane as a supportive skill. It's Buster up, extra attack up, crit up, MP gain up by 50%, which is huge by the way, as well as party-wide Invul Pierce. So you can use her as a Invul Pierce specific support against certain bosses. But of course, the skill has a very hefty cost of draining all of her MP gauge. Now, if you're only using her as a support for this skill, you have instant access to it because her second skill is a full charge and she can just use the third skill to drain all of it and then give the party whatever it wants. But this is going to be a lot more awkward to use if you're using her as the main DPS. This basically means that unless you have a bunch of other chargers to charge her back to 100% after draining, she's not going to be able to MP while doing this skill on the same turn. And that in particular affects her farming damage. Now, there are scenarios where you're able to click this in 3-turn farming, mainly when there's a 1 enemy wave. So considering she can guarantee her hand, if there's just a 1 enemy wave, you can technically click her battery, click this skill, click skill 1 and get all of her cards, and then just kill the enemy with cards only. And then of course, you will have access to the mana burst, the extra attack up, and the crit up. You still won't have access to the P mod on following turns though, because it's only a 1-turn effect. But yeah, it is night and day in terms of her farming damage, depending on whether you get to click the skill or not. And I will introduce a looping comp that actually allows you to use this skill while also using 3 MPs every turn, but that involves double Oberon, so not sure if everybody's the biggest fan of this. But overall, really stacked skill, really big cost, but great supportive skill, specifically against bosses with invul as well, and also a big self-damage juicer. And of course in the challenge quest, you can definitely click this, over using an MP, because I would say the amount of buffs that this gives is worth a supportive MP anyways, so it's kind of fair. Now let's rewind a little bit and go through her skill set again, but this time in her 3rd Ascension form. Now I know I said she has completely different skill sets depending on her Ascension, but usually they do have a couple of shared effects on each skill. Hopefully I presented it relatively clearly in this format. Keep in mind that her 3rd Ascension form is going to be more of a supportive and multi-core focused unit, as opposed to her 1st Ascension form being more selfish and single-core focused. So a lot of this will make a lot more sense if you keep that context in mind. Her first skill, in her 3rd Ascension form, still has the cooldown reduction by 2, 50 Star Bomb, Party MP Seal for 1 turn, and AoE heal down by 50% for 3 turns. All of these are the exact same, but instead of self-MP damage up and card shuffle, she now gives the entire party 20% attack up for 3 turns, as well as 20% crit up for 3 turns. So most importantly, she loses the ability to get all of her cards with her first skill in her 3rd Ascension form, which drastically reduces her effectiveness in single core farming, because now she can't guarantee Buster crit damage in her looping. But of course she has better party-wide supportability with the charisma as well as the party-wide crit up. The charisma especially is really nice for multi-core farming. Olga's skill 2, in her 3rd Ascension form, instead of a self 300% MP battery, is now a Tez battery. So she gives herself 50% total charge and her other 2 allies 30% MP charge. And instead of a self 2-stage overcharge boost for 1 time 3 turns, it's now for the entire party, but only for 1 stage for 1 time 3 turns. So again, leaning a lot heavier into the multi-core / supportive sort of aspect of this servant. Combined with her first skill's charisma, she is really giving Tez a run for his money, and as you'll see later when talking about her MP, I believe she is a more powerful version of Tez in terms of multi-core farming, because of how powerful this battery is, identical to Tez, and her actually having better party-wide buffs when you take her MP into consideration as well. The overcharge is also very useful with specific units like Tonalico, once again, as well as just units in general that have, good overcharge effects. Olga Marie's skill 3 in her 3rd Ascension form has mostly the same effect as her 1st Ascension form. You can still only use it if you have at least 100 MP or more, and it still drains your entire MP gauge. She still has most of the party buffing effects, like the Buster Up, the Extra Attack Up, the Crit Up, and the MP Gain Up, but instead of giving herself Buster Up, she gives the entire party Invul for 1 time 3 turns, and instead of giving the entire party Invul Pierce, she gives the entire party Debuff Immunity for 3 turns. Just straight up 3 turns, not even like 1 time 3 turns or whatever. And the power mod that she gains for a single turn while activating this skill, instead of being targeted against normal classes, it's now against extra classes, including beasts enemies, which, that's not always the case for extra class calculations in this game. It's a bit wonky, but this in particular includes beasts. So yeah, this skill, if it's difficult to use in single core farming, it's impossible to use in multi-core farming because she lost her 100 MP battery, or I guess 300 MP battery, on her skill 2. I bet there's some kind of wonky Tonalico comp that can give her enough charge to click this skill, but 99% of the time, this skill is dead in her multi-core farming, which is kind of unfortunate because, again, if you want to treat her as a Tez replacement, if she could use this willy-nilly, she's gonna outscale Tez just from this additional effect alone, but usually you're not gonna be able to click it. The skill is actually another interesting niche support effect for boss fights. It's not necessarily always better than her 1st Ascension form because she loses the Invul Pierce ability, but instead she gives the party 1 hit of Invul, good for blocking MP, as well as 3 turns of debuff immunity. So against bosses like Cernunnos, I believe I already saw like a boss fight run with this Marie against Cernunnos. This is going to be a super broken effect, and also just against a lot of different bosses like to spam debuffs in general. This is the most powerful party-wide debuff immunity effect in the game, I believe. And the P-mod is, again, just a tiny little bonus. You're not going to be able to activate this skill very often in this form in particular. Obviously, you can use Olga as a pure support, and in this form, in general, she's going to be a better support than her 1st Ascension, because obviously her 1st and 2nd skills are a lot better at supporting. So for example, her 1st skill now has a party-wide 20% crit for 3 turns. Combined with this, it's a total of a party-wide 50% crit up, right? So it's really good. You just have to feed her 50 extra charge, which if you have her append to at max, 30 extra charge in order to activate all of her supportive skills. Finally, we can take a look at her passives, which fortunately she does not have different ones depending on her ascension. She has a couple of not important ones: Territory Creation A, Item Construction B, and Divinity. I would say none of them are super good, like the art sub is nice, I guess. But she also has 2 very unique passives. Number 1 is Defender of Humanity. She basically gives herself a conditional guts that procs against threat to humanity enemies for 1 time that revives her with 5,000 HP and is stackable. This will show up as a boxed buff on Olga Marie regardless if she's actually against a threat to humanity enemy or not, meaning that Tez's first skill, which buffs people with guts and additional time, can actually proc on Olga Marie because of this passive, which is pretty cool. This might actually be more useful than the actual effect for guts against threat to humanity. And also, of course, this makes her a pretty good boss killer against threat to humanity enemies because she gets a free extra life. The passive also turns her extra attack into an AoE attack, which we've all seen how it worked with Aoko and Phantasmoon, where whenever an attack is an AoE attack, its base MP gain, star gen, and damage would all be cut in half against one specific target, right? But it seems that they learned from that and realize how much it sucks to have that penalty if you're only against one enemy. So this passive only procs if there are more than one enemy on the field. This also means that this attack is quote-unquote spaced out when combined with her normal face cards. Again, we've seen how this worked with Aoko and Phantasmoon. If you kill an enemy with your cards, let's say you did a Buster, Quick Buster chain, the extra attack will not come out. Because just like an MP, this is treated as a separate attack in the chain. This also means that she can break a lot of guts in a single turn with a chain. I demonstrated this against the Herc advancement quest, but basically if you do a Buster, MP Buster extra Brave chain, the Buster will break the guts, and then the MP will space out the attack, it'll break another guts, and then the Buster, of course, got spaced out, will break another guts, and the extra attack, because it is considered a separate attack, like an MP, you can break a fourth guts with it. Her second unique passive is an on guts activated buff, which of course works with her previous passive if she's against threat to humanity enemies, or just any guts in general. So for example, if you gave her guts with Tonalico skill 3 or a guts CE, this would also proc. So whenever a guts procs, she will give herself a 3-turn 20% buster up, a 1-time 3-turn invul that is stackable with other invuls, and a self 10% MP charge, as well as a demerit of a self 1000 max HP down for 3 turns. So this is pretty cool to protect her after a guts proc in a team. So how guts work in a team is that if an enemy procs your guts, when you have more than one servant, they would have to switch targets, but then they can switch back to the first target after the guts proc. So you can still get killed even if you give yourself guts in a certain given turn. Which is why most people don't like guts survival effects over like invul, for example, right? But this kind of solves that problem because the enemy will proc your guts, they're forced to switch targets, and then when they come back to Olga Marie, they would still get blocked by the invul. Finally, Olga's MP is an AoE 5-hit Buster MP that casts a Rainbow Resist down by 20% for a single turn before the MP does damage, and it buffs the entire party's attack up for 3 turns after the MP does damage. That scales from 10% to 30% depending on MP level. The MP also charges the entire party's MP gauge by 10%, an additional 10% towards man, star attribute, or living human allies. And finally, the overcharge of the MP is an anti-man or star attribute super effective that scales from 150% all the way up to 200%. So this is a really strong MP for both single core and multi-core. The Rainbow Resist down is just the standard way of increasing the MP damage by a little bit before it does damage, and of course it also increases MP gain if you're following it up with a quick or arts card. The MP gives a massive 30% attack up for 3 turns for the entire party if you're at MP 5, but only 10% at MP 1. So this is the second literal pay to win part of her kit, which is kind of unfortunate because if you can guarantee like I would say 20% attack up even just at MP 2, this is a super powerful multi-core damage buffer MP. The MP also charges the entire party's MP gauge by 10%. So with her third Ascension form, she has the Tez battery on her second skill, and she also charges the entire party by 10% after she MPs. So she has the exact same MP charge numbers as Tez. And it's even better because if your allies are man or star attribute or living human, she charges them by an additional 10, so a total of 20, including herself as well. So this isn't just a good multi-core effect, this also helps with her MP charge in single core scenarios, because she always flat refunds 20 when she uses her own MP. And of course, the overcharge effect is really good coverage. Anti-man is really good coverage, and now it also includes star, so it's slightly better than anti-man. And as I mentioned before when talking about her second skill, if you have her at MP5 when you're using her second skill, it immediately takes it to 200% super effective, which is really broken, but normally it's going to be the standard 150% super effective. And honestly, even at MP1, it's still at a 300% overcharge when you use her second skill, so it's not that bad. Like, the pay to win thing is not as blatant as Arcoade or Tonalico's direct super effective scaling, in my opinion. So overall, this is a super stacked MP with really good anti-trait coverage, and if you have her at higher MP levels, this makes her in my opinion, just directly better than Tez at multi-core because she has potentially better charge than Tez, because like there are a lot of man, star, or living human servants in the game, and also the attack up at just MP2 is 20%. Add that up to her first skill's charisma, it's already 40% for any target instead of just for, allies with guts, right? And it can obviously go higher if you have her at higher MP levels, up to a total of 50% for the entire party after she's used her first MP. So how do I feel about Olga Marie? Well, in terms of farming, first and foremost, she is the most flexible Buster Looper in the entire game. What I mean by that is if your goal is just to use her MP 3 turns in a row, all she needs is a single Koyan Light and additional 30% MP charge. The reason behind that is because she has a very short cooldown on her 300 MP battery, and with the help of Append 5, a single Koyan Sky of Light is enough cooldown reduction for her to use it on turn 1 and then again on turn 3. So on turn 1, you would use her big battery and then MP. On turn 2, you would use Koyan Light's battery, and because her MP will recharge herself by 20, all you need is an additional 30% MP charge to make it 100 to MP again. And finally, on the third turn, you get to use her 100 MP battery again, or I guess 300 MP battery, in order to use her MP for a third time. So there are an infinite amount of combinations that you can use, even if you're just looking at a frontline only comp. The most powerful partner to pair with Koyan Light is perhaps Merlin, because Merlin is now a 30 charger after last year's buff, and obviously when you use Olga Marie, you're also going to have access to her face cards when using her skill 1, meaning that Merlin can not just bolster Olga Marie's MP damage, but also her card damage. And you can also, of course, go super minimal and use the most recently buffed Shakespeare and still charge Olga Marie by 30% MP, as well as buff her Buster and MP damage. Because this comp does not include any specific Mystic Code or a fourth member on your team, you have complete freedom to level up any Mystic Code and bring any backline for bond farming if you are just using this minimal Buster looping comp. And even though you are missing out on damage, this should still suffice against the easier lower HP farming nodes, such as normal story free quests or event free quests that are lower difficulty than 90++. So yeah, Olga Marie is very convenient to use because of this reason. Now, there is a small disadvantage of this team, which is that if you're only using one Koyanskaya of Light, you can only use her skill 1 specifically on turn 1 and turn 3 in order for it to have enough cooldown reduction. And what this means is that your access to her face cards are limited to only on turn 1 and turn 3 specifically. And a lot of the times you actually want her face cards on turn 2 instead, because turn 2 has usually a bigger HP target than turn 1. The easiest way to remedy this is, of course, adding more cooldown reducers, aka a second Koyanskaya of Light. When you have double Koyan Light with Olga Marie, it means that you can hold off on using her skill 1 on turn 1 and use it on turn 2 instead, and still have enough cooldown reduction in total to use it again on turn 3. And this gives you complete freedom as to when you want to have full access to her entire deck, which is super important in my opinion. There are of course other ways to remedy this, such as using one Koyan Light paired with one Atlas Academy Mystic Code, which is basically the same thing as double Koyan Light because Atlas also has 2 turn cooldown reduction, or even some other supports that have 1 turn worth of cooldown reduction, such as Typhon Ephemeros, who has a party-wide 20% MP battery, charisma, and a targetable cooldown reduction and crit buff. This does mean that you have to bring a Mystic Code to provide the 10 extra charge in order to make another 100 on turn 2, but yeah, overall I would just mainly focus on using double Koyan Light if you want to, be able to choose whatever turns you have access to her entire hand. As I mentioned earlier, I personally value the flexibility of being able to activate her first skill in any of the 2 out of the 3 turns in a 3-turn farming, because you want to have access to your cards on certain waves depending on the farming node. So today, in terms of damage calculations, I'm mainly going to focus on double Koyan light comps when paired with Olga Marie. I also do believe it is a little bit more fair when comparing to other Buster Loopers, as they absolutely have to use double Koyanskaya of Light. And of course, even though you don't need a plug suit and a 4th member on your team, just to make things fair, I will be including burst units such as Oberon, who can help maximize her MP damage, or just like when I did with CL, Merlin, because Olga Marie is going to have a lot of damage focused on her card damage instead of just the MP, so Merlin can potentially be a more powerful finisher than Oberon under certain circumstances. So those are going to be the main teams we look at today when compared to other Buster Loopers. The Buster Loopers I'll be comparing her to are units that do not need any starting charge to loop with double Koyan Light plug Oberon, and these units include Melusine, Tonalico Arc, and Tiamat, and we're not going to consider any CEs in this scenario because I also believe it is more fair to consider just no CEs or using a Bond Boost CE rather than MLB Black Grill, because during a lot of events you don't actually want to use MLB Black Grill, and instead you probably want to use some kind of other event bonus CEs. And finally, in terms of Olga's looping damage, we're going to take a look at 3 sets of damages, because depending on when she uses her skill 1, either on turn 1, turn 2, turn 1, turn 3, or turn 2, turn 3, her damage is going to vary slightly, because her skill 1 also has MP damage up effects, so if you use it early on and you stack it with double Koyan Light, her MP damage is going to be higher across 3 different waves, while if you save it for later turns, it's going to be a little bit lower across all 3 different waves. And also, we're going to take a look at MP1 and MP5 performance, because Olga Marie not just scales her base MP damage with MP levels, she also scales the attack up that she gains from her MP levels, which will affect her face cards as well. So yeah, that's a lot to take in. I apologize. Maybe it'll be a little bit easier to understand when I finally put the numbers on screen. But yeah, that's all I'm going to, go through today. There are a lot more numbers we can potentially go through, but I don't want to make this video way too long. So taking a look at Olga's looping damage with double Koyan Light plug Oberon, if we just look at the MP damage, her damage really isn't the most flattering when compared to the other Buster Loopers. However, whenever you add on her Buster Brave Chain crit damage, it's gonna skyrocket for obvious reasons. And if we look at the total damage section, on the 2 waves where she has access to her face cards, there are no Buster Loopers that come close to the amount of damage that she can do. Not even Tiamat, where we are actually considering her hitting 1.5 times class advantage in this scenario instead of hitting neutral damage. Usually, farming nodes have 1 big HP target on each wave as the damage check. Therefore, even though we're just looking at the damage against 1 target, Olga Marie is going to be able to handle a lot of 90+ pluses better than a normal Buster Looper. If we take a look at her damage when using her first skill on turn 1 and turn 2, it is the most balanced across 3 different waves, but also it has the absolute worst burst damage on the 3rd wave, only about on par and slightly worse than a normal Buster Looper, because you don't have access to your face cards. There are some 90+ pluses that line up like this, but it's really rare. Usually you want to save skill 1 usage on the final turn. And as you can see here on the other 2 comps where you do use your skill 1 on turn 3, her burst damage is absolutely insane, right? Her MP1 burst damage against a single target is as much damage as other Buster Loopers at MP5 against 1 target, because once again, the card damage hard carries her total damage. But do remember though, if you're doing this on the wave where she does not have access to her cards, she also does not have access to Oberon's skill 3 buff, meaning that she's going to have a significant disadvantage when compared to other Buster Loopers. As you can see here, if you're not using your cards on wave 1, her wave 1 damage is very much lower than all the other Buster Loopers, only at 27,000 at MP1 and 45,000 at MP5. Just not even close, halved of a lot of other Buster Loopers' damage. And look at her wave 2. If she's not using her cards on wave 2, her damage is also very not flattering, 47,000 damage when compared to other units that are hitting about 60 to 70,000 at MP1, and of course at MP5, still not great when compared to other units. This is going to be a trend where Olga is not going to be able to hit really good damage without the cards, but with cards, she absolutely demolishes any other Buster Looper in the game. But of course, we don't have to just look at her damage when you're using double Koyan Light plug Oberon. We can also take a look at her damage with double Koyan Light plug Merlin. Now, using Merlin, there are two main ways you can format how you want to farm. Number one is using him sort of like Oberon, where you save the hero creation for the final turn for maximum burst damage. But you can also, of course, use the hero creation early on to have better damage across 3 different waves while sacrificing a little bit of burst damage, because you don't get Eternal Sleep debuffed after the first turn of using hero creation. You simply lose the 100% crit up for following turns, but you still have access to that 50% extra buster up. This can potentially help with the weakest link turns that I mentioned earlier with the Oberon comps when compared to other Buster Loopers. As you can see here, first of all, let's take a look at the maximum burst damage comps with Merlin, where you save your hero creation for the final turn where you have access to your cards for absolutely maximum damage. Taking a look at the numbers here, the trends are extremely similar when compared to the Oberon comp. The biggest difference is perhaps when you use her skill 1 on turn 1 and turn 2, because when you do that, the last turn when you have guaranteed cards is on turn 2, so you will be popping the hero creation on turn 2 instead of turn 3. So you have even more burst damage on turn 2, but then you have even less damage on turn 3 because Merlin does not buff your MP as much as Oberon buffs your MP. So this comp, again, I highly recommend against. It's not very good, not suited for most 90++ nodes. And if we take a look at the other 2 comps where you use her skill 1 on turn 2, turn 3, or turn 1, turn 3, the trend is basically identical to the Oberon comp, where you're going to have a really weak wave where you don't have access to your cards, and then you're going to have 2 very strong waves where you do have access to your cards. Interestingly, the burst turn with the Merlin comp is actually higher than Oberon's comp because of how card damage heavy Olga Marie is in terms of her looping damage. But honestly, this way of using Merlin doesn't solve any of the problems that Oberon has. It just increases the burst damage slightly. And also remember, we're not considering using any CE here, so if you're using a CE with an MP damage buff effect, maybe Oberon will prevail over Merlin again. So I don't prefer using Merlin this way because you're not really gaining any additional advantages when compared to using Oberon. In order to mitigate that problem, we of course can use Merlin in the second way, where you pop hero creation early in order to get better damage early on. Now you will be sacrificing burst damage, as you can see here, with these wave 3 total damages compared to the burst Merlin comp and Oberon comp. It is quite a bit lower. However, as you can see, for the trade-off, you are getting better damage earlier on. Now the unfortunate thing with this is that, especially in the specific situation where you're using your skill 1 on turn 2 and turn 3, if you want decent wave 1 damage, you're gonna have to blow your hero creation on 1, but you do not have access to your cards, meaning that you're kind of wasting that 100% crit up. But as you can see here, these numbers compared to these other Buster Loopers, it's a lot closer in terms of their wave 1 damage, so sometimes you will be forced to do something similar to this just because, they made wave 1 have more HP. And even if you're giving up on the burst, because of the carry of face card damage, your wave 3 is still going to be really competitive compared to other Buster Loopers. Only really getting, caught up by Tiamat hitting class advantage at any given MP level. So, it's still pretty high standards if you only struggle against one high HP target usually. So I think this comp is a great alternative as well. Now, if you really hate having any of your waves be specifically low damage, maybe against certain, 90 plus pluses where there are like 1-1-1 enemies, for example, or maybe, they just have very even HP across 3 different waves, we've seen that before, then you can give up on a third buffer like Oberon or Merlin and instead plug in a Cardlock unit, aka Summer BB, in order to just have access to all of your cards at all times. And as you can see here with the total damage, it is still really competitive on the burst wave, obviously a lot worse than the numbers we've seen before in other comps with Olga Marie, but compared to other Buster Loopers, you're only really losing to Tiamat when fighting against Calvaries, which it is a really high bar. Tiamat is the, damage peak in terms of Buster Looping, especially when you consider her not hitting neutral, right? And compared to other Buster Loopers that hit neutral, you are still very competitive, at least against one target. Your damage about matches what the other Buster Loopers are doing, and even slightly higher. But of course, as you can see here, with the total damage breakdown, every wave you have really consistent damage. Even on wave 1, you have considerably higher damage than every other Buster Looper in the game, because you're going to be able to do MP, BB, full crit, extra attack, Brave Chain every turn, right? If you don't have Summer BB, there's even another way to remedy this. You can start out with CL and then, get the entire hand, and then swap CL out for Olga Marie, and then don't use her skill 1. So on turn 2, you can use her skill 1 with double Koyanskaya, you have enough cooldown reduction, and then use it again on turn 3. So this is basically just in case you don't have Summer BB and you're still required to do this for a specific 90++, then if you have CL, you can do this as well. Arguably, Olga Marie's greatest downfall in terms of Buster Looping is her actual MP damage. And one of the biggest reasons behind that is she doesn't have the ability to use her skill 3 in a 3-turn looping comp. Having a full drain and still requiring her to use her MP 3 times in a row without any starting charge CE seems a little bit harsh. But there's actually one comp that allow you to achieve that. And the comp is U-Olga Marie, Koyan Light, Oberon, and then plug in another Oberon. The way you do this is on turn 1, you would use Olga Marie's skill 2 and skill 1, and then you would MP. And of course, buff her with Koyan Light as well. On turn 2, because of her MP's effect, she would get 20% flat refund. And now you can use Koyan Light's battery on her and swap her out for Oberon, and then use both Oberon's skill 1. And now she will end up with a total of 110% MP. Then she can full drain all of that MP with her skill 3, and then use Oberon's skill 2 twice on her. She would have 100 MP again, and she gets to use her MP. So on turn 2, she actually gets a total of 210% MP, 100% of which she would drain with her skill 3. And finally, on turn 3, you get her 300% MP battery back and her skill 1 back, and then you can go ham, also use both of Oberon's skill 3 and have really high turn 3 burst damage as well. The only weakness of this comp is that there's only one Koyan Light, meaning that you are locked into using your cards on turn 1 and turn 3 specifically. You do not have the option to use your cards on turn 2. However, you kind of make up for it because your turn 2 damage is going to be really good if you're fighting against the standard 7 class enemies, because remember, skill 3 is not just a mana burst, it also is a 50% power mod for a single turn against standard 7 class enemies. So as you can see here in this chart, her wave 2 damage is very respectable despite not having the ability to use any of her cards. It's pretty comparable to the other Buster Loopers that don't need starting charge, other than Tiamat. Again, Tiamat is always going to be the high end, the ceiling in terms of pure MP damage, but for someone like Olga Marie, this is very respectable. So I think this is actually one of the better quote-unquote standard comps you can go for if you are not familiar with the layout of the 90++, because this is the most amount of MP damage on every single wave that Olga Marie can achieve in a Buster Looping comp. And also on wave 3, this is the highest burst damage we have ever seen out of all the comps I've introduced tonight. So I think, again, this is a really good comp. You should probably go for it if you can. And as much as I hate double Oberon comps, this is better MP damage than double Koyan Light comps. And finally, I just want to briefly mention the possibility of carding one wave. So the other way of allowing Olga Marie to use her skill 3 is just to not use her MP 3 turns in a row. And this is obviously only going to be applicable if there are waves that only have one enemy. But when that exists, you can actually, instead of using your MP, just click skill 3 and then use your entire deck for damage. And I have the damage breakdown here as well, assuming you are using Merlin as your support and you are using hero creation on the card only turn to maximize damage. And I'm not going to go too deep into this, but as you can see here, on the card only turns, your total damage against a single target is honestly super good. Again, when you use your skill 3, you do have power mod against standard 7 class enemies. So in practicality, as you can see here with the numbers, you are going to be doing pretty good damage because usually you don't hit extra class, before wave 3 in 90++ farming. So this is really good, but not always applicable. There are of course even more ways to use her skill 3 in a 3-turn farming scenario. For example, if you know for a fact that you do enough damage on that wave, but you won't kill with your MP alone, you can even try something like MP Arts crit chains to manually charge your MP back to 100 in order to have that bonus 100% to drain with her skill 3. However, those are even more node specific, so I don't want to even calculate damage for them. So after looking at all of these numbers, Olga Marie is really good. Again, assuming most 90++ waves have one big target that's going to gate your damage and everyone else is pretty easy to take out with your MP alone, Olga Marie has way higher ceiling than a normal Buster Looper just because she has access to her cards. However, there is one servant that recently got buffed who has a very similar attribute to Olga Marie: Ishtar Archer. Again, this is not an Ishtar review, so I'm not going to go too deep into this, but Ishtar's most recent 3rd skill buff allows her to get her entire hand after using that skill delayed for a turn. So you don't have the choice of getting your hand on turn 1, not nearly as flexible as Olga Marie, but you're guaranteed to get your hand on turn 2 and turn 3, which is usually the ideal way to do this anyways, because again, turn 2 and turn 3 usually have the higher HP targets. Ishtar also gained the ability to loop without starting charge with this buff. And as you can see here, Ishtar is a servant that actually has good MP damage and an upgraded MP at that. And compared to Olga Marie, her MP damage portion of her total damage is gonna be a lot better. Now, Olga still has the edge in terms of card damage in a lot of the cases, but especially when you compare Ishtar's damage to Olga Marie when both are using Oberon, Ishtar has a very clear edge over Olga Marie. Because of her flexibility, her ability to push damage via gaining access to her face cards, and basically being an AoE version of CL, which is even better than CL herself in terms of farming, I think Olga Marie deserves S tier in terms of single core Buster looping. Absolutely worth it, even though her MP damage is a little bit disappointing, especially if you have both Oberon and Koyan Light, because you can swap to the double Oberon comp if you want more MP damage over more card damage as well. So that is a lot, but trust me, I already cut a lot of content. For example, Olga Marie can even do something like Buster, MP Buster, if a given wave has 2 equally high HP targets instead of doing MP Buster, so you have more equally distributed damage across 2 targets. But I'm not going to include that because, that would add so many numbers to the massive amounts of numbers we already have. The TLDR version of this, if you don't care about all that, you want to skip all the numbers, then Olga Marie is a Buster Looper that is really flexible, that can easily 3-turn Looper MP without any starting charge or even specific Mystic Code, and with just one Koyan Light, she can pull it off. Her most important append skill is append 5. Her append 2 basically is never relevant in her first single core form, so max out her append 5 at all costs. So finally, we're done with the most complicated section of the entire video. We can move on to Olga Marie's performance as a multi-core farmer, and that is going to mainly focus on her third Ascension form instead of her first Ascension form. And her third Ascension form is very easy to understand. I already brought it up when going through her skill set. She's basically Tezcatlipoca EX, right? Because she has the exact same battery as Tezcatlipoca, 50 to herself and 30 to her allies, and she also charges the entire party with 10% MP whenever she herself MPs, just like Tezcatlipoca. The charge is slightly better than Tez because she also charges man, star, and living human attribute servants by an additional 10% MP, including herself as well. So there are possibilities for you to build a team where she can MP twice instead of just once, even in a multi-core setup. Secondly, she has better buffs overall than Tezcatlipoca if you have her MP level up. Her first skill is a generic charisma, just like Tezcatlipoca's first skill, but Tezcatlipoca can double buff servants with guts, while Olga Marie's MP at MP2 can already give the entire party 20% attack up additionally after she MPs. So she is sort of like a conditionless Tez if she gets to use her MP. And especially at MP5, she is a better conditionless Tez because she now gives a total of 50% attack up whenever she MPs. Olga Marie also has better utility on top of potentially better charisma than Tezcatlipoca. Her first skill is a whopping 50 star bomb as well as a party crit up. So if your multi-core farming team somehow wants to have a turn of crit damage, she can handle it better than Tez. Her second skill is also an additional party-wide one-stage overcharge boost, meaning that she pairs very well with units that have good overcharge, especially Tonalico. Once again, Tonalico is the biggest winner at the end of the day because the game loves to add overcharge units into the game. Now, Olga Marie has one glaring weakness in terms of her multi-core farming performance, and it's gonna sound very familiar to her single-core farming weakness, which is of course her really bad raw MP damage. And the reason behind it is the same as her single core looping problem as well, her inability to use her skill 3. And it's even more difficult to squeeze out enough charge for her to use her skill 3 in a multi-core setup compared to in a single core setup, because she loses her 300% self MP battery, and also you just don't have that much chargers to dump onto her if you're also handling other units' MP charges. And when we take a look at her raw MP damage in her third form without her skill 3 compared to the other two quote-unquote staple party 30 MP charging multi-core farmers, Koyan Dark and Tezcatlipoca, it's really not pretty. And you realize how sad this is because both Tezcatlipoca and Koyan Dark are known to have pretty bad raw MP damage, right? They're not powerhouse MP damage dealers. So if you compare her to other stronger units such as Lohi with class advantage or Typhon Ephemeros, who has worse party charge than Olga Marie but way better raw MP damage, then things are not looking great for her. Now, I still believe Olga Marie is a top-tier multi-core farmer in her third Ascension form because she's kind of like Tonalico, who has pretty puny wave 1 damage as well, but the payoff is worth it because of how much support and damage boost she can provide the entire party, especially when you're pairing her with man, star, or living human attributes. Her total party MP charge can rival that of Tonalico, who obviously has insane amounts of party charge if she gets to use her skill 3. In terms of challenge quest performance, Olga Marie is once again gonna have two very distinctive playstyles, just like her farming. If you're using her first and second Ascension form, she's gonna be extremely similar to how she functions in single core farming. She's going to be a hyper-offensive, card-centric, min-turn-centric DPS that tries to burst down the enemy as fast as possible with Buster Brave crit chains. And because you're fighting a boss, you're going to have even more opportunities to get MP back by using your face cards. So you can probably squeeze in her skill 3 a lot more than when compared to her farming scenarios. Her best partner is going to be Koyanskaya of Light, and especially considering even though she's just like AoE CL, she has worse self-preservation effects than CL, you're gonna be forced to be even more aggressive when using this form. Other units that are good for supporting her in this form are just good card buffers. Once again, Merlin is a very good choice, and also you can use Summer Scotty for buster crits, as well as Kazuha drop for a rainbow resist down for cards only, essentially. So all of these strong card buffers are going to be great secondary supports on top of the 2 Koyanskaya of Lights. However, if your game plan is not to burst down the enemy as fast as possible, instead, you want to go with a slower, safer approach, then I highly recommend using her 3rd Ascension form as a challenge quest DPS. Yes, you are losing the self 300% MP battery, as well as the full hand shuffle. However, in exchange, you're getting a lot more powerful party support effects. And just like how Tonaliko functions in a challenge quest as a DPS, if you can support your other supports with your own skill set, they will in turn come back and support you as a DPS better. And Olga Marie very much embodies that whole playstyle. Her skill 2 is now essentially a 5-turn cooldown, self 50% battery, and party 30% battery that also gives overcharge. So on top of being a really good battery with really short cooldowns, you can even benefit supports that benefits from overcharge, which is most of them. If you take a look at characters like Constantine, Merlin, and especially Castoria, they all heavily benefit from overcharge effects. Olga Marie also charges the entire party whenever she uses her MP. So if you are able to get the engine running and you start to spam your support's MP like Merlin to get your entire party's MP up, as well as Olga Marie's MP running, then your entire party can spam their MPs a lot more often than usual. And also because of the ability to eventually go into a state where you're probably double MPing every turn at the very least, having no access to your entire hand is not that big a deal because you're not going to be using a Brave Chain most of the times anyways. And finally, Olga Marie's 3rd skill, if you pair her with enough good party chargers, can be activated relatively often, and it is a very powerful skill. On top of being a party-wide hard survival for 1 hit to block MPs, it is also a party-wide MP gain boost by 50%, which doesn't just increase your MP gain when you're attacking, but also when you are taking hits from the enemies. So just like Rhaenys, it is a very powerful skill to allow your party to spam their MP even further. And also, it has the most powerful party-wide debuff immunity effect in the entire game, straight up 3 turns. So against certain bosses like Cernunnos, this can completely shut down their entire gimmick. With this particular form of Olga, I actually don't really suggest bringing Koyan Light with her for a boss fight, maybe just 1, but definitely not double Koyan Light, because your game plan is going to be slower to begin with. Characters such as Merlin and Castoria naturally fits better into this playstyle, and especially characters like Merlin who can consistently feed the entire party charge, as well as give the entire party 30% MP charge, is a great fit because it either helps Olga spam her MP and then charge the entire party even more, or to actually be able to use her skill 3 by draining herself with 100% MP. Castoria also is incidentally a star attribute servant, so Olga can charge her by 20% instead of just 10% whenever she MPs. If you want to go even harder with spamming Olga's skills, you can even swap Castoria out for Tamamo in order to get even more party charge as well as more cooldown reduction. And with this team, even though you don't have access to Solemn Defense, you still have pretty good access to invols in general, because Merlin's Illusion and Olga's skill 3 will both be on relatively short cooldown with the help of Tamamo. And again, you don't need cleanse that much with this team because Olga already gives you so much debuff immunity. So this is another team that I really like. Obviously, other slow buster supports such as Constantine or slow generic supports like Rhaenys also work well with Olga. And overall, I just think this form is a way better challenge quest unit unless you are going for a min turn, and I would highly suggest just sticking with this if you're doing a boss fight, especially if you're going in blind. And finally, if you only have Olga at MP1, for example, she can also serve as a pure support. Once again, her third form is going to be a lot stronger than her first form. You can simply give her a 50 starting charge CE and immediately pop her skill 3. Even in min turns, I pretty often use Olga's third ascension form just to counter certain debuff heavy bosses. For example, against Demonic Bodhisattva, I really like using Olga. I think I use her in every one of my runs ever since she came out, just as a support. And once again, it's super easy to include her in the party. You can even use the 3-star version of the 50 starting charge CE in order to activate her skill 3. And on top of the skill 3, again, she has a lot of good buffs in general, as well as a 50 star bomb, so she can even help you guarantee your crits. First Ascension Olga can technically also be a support, mainly when you need Invul Pierce, because her third skill is a 3-turn Invul Pierce for the entire party. You don't even need to give her any starting charge CE because she can pop it immediately after using her skill 2's full charge battery. In conclusion, Olga Marie is probably the servant that can serve the most different roles the best we've ever seen in this game. Especially if you're a new player that don't have a lot of the previous servants, if you just roll and invest in one servant, Olga Marie, she can probably cover for 3 to 4 different servants. As a Buster single core looper, Olga has a bit of trouble with her MP damage, but more than makes up for it with her guaranteed hand shuffle and her Buster crit damage. Olga also doesn't need a lot in order to loop without any starting charge. Technically, you don't even need to own your own Koyan Light in order for her to loop. So again, for new players that don't have anything, Olga is a very good pick to invest in. As a multi-core farmer, Olga is basically a better version of Tezcatlipoca, who was already a staple of multi-core because of how convenient his battery charge numbers are. Olga does once again have problem with her raw MP damage. However, because of how much utility she can provide, she more so than makes up for it in terms of value. And once again, if you do invest in her, you can kind of mitigate that poor MP damage. As a challenge quest DPS, Olga can go super aggressive in her first ascension form or slow and methodical in her third. Especially her third ascension form has a lot of different tools to keep your team alive, even if you don't have all the premium SSR supports. Just by using Olga's third ascension and borrowing a Merlin or Castoria, you can probably push through the majority of the story content in this game. And also, this is a little bit unrelated, but if you are struggling with the U-Olga Marie quests that are currently, on the Bleach Earth for JP, all of the Olga Marie bosses are fully weak to Olga. So they deal half damage and takes double damage. So she's kind of a cheat button for Olga Marie quests as well. So not to say you should roll for her just because you're struggling with Olga Marie quests, but it's a nice little bonus. And then finally, if you really aren't interested in Olga and you just want to pull one copy for collection's sake, she can still serve as a very decent support, especially to counter niche boss gimmicks. Her third ascension form is a better generic support and also a good debuff counter, and her first ascension form can serve as a really good Invul Pierce giver. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I apologize for how long this took. I already cut a lot of content from the video, but it still took this long. Only a couple hours before Olga's banner ends, and I am very sorry. I hope she gets a rerun when Grand Raids come back on August 27th, so this video doesn't feel completely worthless. But yeah, I think Olga is a perfect fit for a 10th Annie servant, not just from an aesthetic and lore-wise perspective, but also from a gameplay perspective. Because if you are a returning player after quitting the game for a long time, you get the massive amounts of Saint Courts from clearing Ordeal Call 4, maybe you have to rush the story a little bit, and you can just pull for high MP Olga, and then she can take care of most jobs that you would want to do in this game until Part 2 ends and beyond. Olga is a servant whose rating drastically increases the more investment you have in her, because every single aspect, even stats that only affects card damage, will improve her farming and her challenge quest performance in a very significant way. So yeah, for all the people that 120'd hypered Olga, do not regret. She is wonderful, absolute S tier if you have her at max investment. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for your patience. I'll see you guys in the next one.